Melanie and I, we were asked by my cousin to watch his boys. So he has a 4-year-old boy and a 2-year-old, almost 3-year-old boy. And then he also has a 5-month-old baby. We're not watching the baby. That's, we're not to that level quite yet. So anyways, they asked, hey, can you watch these 2 boys? And so usually, whenever we watch them, we go to their house and they have all their games and all their stuff. But this time they're going to have to come to our house. So we knew it was going to be a little bit different. And we know, our house, we don't really have all the toys and all the kind of stuff that they typically have. So we told them, try to bring a toy or 2. So they did that. And then we started scounging around our house for random toys. I found I had a little tiny 1 Hot Wheel. For 2, and was like, wow, this is going to be so much fun. You guys are going to love this yellow truck that you get to play with. You'll have to share. You can take turns. We found that, so we're figuring, okay, that's a pretty good toy. They had another toy, which was really funny. We were kind of showing them around, and they pointed out instantly, before Pastor Ralph left, he gave me a little toy guitar. It was like a baby toy guitar in Nicole's side. I had that at home. They said, what's that blue thing? And I said, oh, and so anyways, we got it off. They played with the little guitar, and it was fun, but eventually they're like, okay, let's move on. So Melanie, she found some colored pencils, so we colored a little bit. Then eventually moved on from that, they found some stickers. Then we ran out of stickers because they were just going to town on the stickers. And then we had the good idea that we were going to play hide and seek. Anybody like to play hide and seek still? I know that brings it back, but it's a lot of fun. And, we're in an apartment, so there's not a crazy amount of places to hide, but, we're trying to be creative and trying to figure it out. And so we're hiding and we're having a good time and it's fun. But they really had a blast. But it's just funny to me, their concept of a hiding spot is very different than mine. They would just sit down next to a wall and, not hidden at all. He's like, I'm gonna hide here. I'm like, really, buddy? You're just kind of in the middle. Here, let me throw a blanket on you or something. He's like, oh yeah. And he thinks he's really hidden, even though, he's really out in the obvious. And you guys did that too. I mean, we all did that. I did that, you did that. Hopefully you still don't do that. Hopefully you kind of know now, if I put a blanket over my head, people still know me. Yeah, they can still kind of tell where I'm at. But it's just kind of funny, they were thinking of all these places where they could hide. But in reality, they weren't going to get lost, right? Because we're at an apartment, we're locked in, they're not getting out, there's only so many rooms, only so many places. They're always going to be they're always going to be found by me. No matter how good of a spot they think they have, no matter what, they're going to be found. So it's kind of, silly to think that we could actually hide and really get lost in a really tiny space. Unless you're a superstar hider, but they weren't. But it was funny to me because I was thinking about this one guy in the Bible who we're going to see, and he's kind of trying to play hide and go seek with God. Do you think that sounds like a good idea, playing hide and go seek with God? Well, he's going to try it out. It's not a good idea, but he'll still give it a shot. So if you have your Bibles, we're starting a series on the book of, who do you think it is? Jonah. Yeah, Jonah, our good friend Jonah. And God would call Jonah to this great task. He would say, Jonah, I have a great task for you to go out and to follow me and to obey me. But Jonah doesn't. And so we're calling this series Runaway because that's really what Jonah is. He's a runaway. God had called him to this great task to go and to preach, but instead of following in obedience, Jonah ran away. And likewise, what we're going to be challenged with, I think, in these next 4 weeks, is when God calls us to a task, when God has a calling for us, and He does for the church, for you personally, that we wouldn't run away from God, but we would run to Him. And that we would be involved in what God's mission is for our life, and that we could learn some lessons from Jonah. So today in chapter 1, he's going to be disobedient in the sea, and we'll really be looking at some lessons about disobedience. But the good news is, even though we're disobedient, even though we mess up, God pursues us in our disobedience, so we can start running to Him to experience His grace. So Jonah chapter 1, I'm going to start off with the first 3 verses. Jonah chapter 1. And God's word says, the word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Get up, go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because their evil has come up before me. Jonah got up to flee to Tarshish from the Lord's presence. He went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish. He paid the fare and went down into it to go with them to Tarshish from the Lord's presence. So we start off with this great command. Hey, Jonah, we need you to come and to to go and speak to the people of Nineveh. Really awesome, really important command. Well, Jonah, instead of doing that, he's going to run away. So we'll see kind of really 4 things about obedience to God. First off, God is the ultimate standard for obedience. His word is what we live our lives based upon. And the reality is, you will have opportunities to disobey God's word. You're at a time in life where you are making decisions. I mean, you're always making decisions. But especially when you're in middle school and high school, more freedoms are coming open to you. More opportunities come, and you're starting to have more of an influence about what your life looks like. When you're a kid, your parents make a lot of decisions for you. But whenever you're in middle school and high school, you're starting to have a lot more input. What kind of stuff am I going to be involved in? Who are my friends going to be? What are going to be some of the things I do in my free time? And what's fun for me? So you're having all these kinds of opportunities. And likewise, Jonah, he had opportunities. He had an opportunity to obey God, to go to Nineveh. That was a very clear command. But instead of going to Nineveh, he goes to Tarshish. Now, he's telling them to go to Nineveh, and that's kind of maybe not a desirable location. Let me ask you this. Is there one place in the world where you would be super afraid to go? Anybody have a place like, I would not want to go there? Yeah.
Australia.
Australia, why?
There's a lot of deadly animals.
That's true, a lot of deadly animals, yeah. China, why would you be afraid to go to China? Scary? I don't disagree. Afghanistan, right? Why would you be afraid to go to Afghanistan? Terrorist attack, absolutely. North Korea, yeah. Because let's see, so Australia is kind of funny because you'll probably get attacked by a kangaroo or a scorpion or a snake or something. But if we take these other ones, China, Afghanistan, North Korea, what happens if you were to go into the middle, or we can throw Russia in there too, right? If you go into the middle of China and you talk about how bad the Chinese leader is, what do you think is going to happen to you? Not a good idea, right? Or what happens if you go to North Korea? I mean, you just go to North Korea and they'll get you in trouble somehow. Or if you go to Afghanistan, they're terrorists, right? So there's like legitimate fears that we have. And Jonah actually, when you're thinking about Nineveh, he had some legitimate fears. They were kind of like a terrorist capital. They killed people. They put spikes in people. They were bad. They fought against Israel. And so Jonah, he's basically thinking, if I walk into Nineveh, I'm dead meat. I'm dead. They're going to kill me. And not just walk into Nineveh and be like, oh, I'm going to take a little vacation. No, you're actually going to have to go and speak against them. Ooh, that's a challenge, but that's what God has called him to do. So Jonah, he has this command, go to this hard place. God commanded him to do it, so we know that God has a plan. It must be good. But Jonah decides to go to Tarshish. Look with me in verse number 3. It goes to the harbor, and look how many times it says Tarshish in verse 3. Got up to flee Tarshish, went down to Joppa, found a ship going to Tarshish. He paid the fare and went down into it and took him and to go with them to Tarshish. Where's he supposed to go? What town? What city? Nineveh. Jonah. No, not Jonah. Nineveh. Where does he go? Tarshish. And then verse 3 says it 3 times. So he's supposed to go to Nineveh, but he goes to Tarshish, Tarshish, Tarshish. Right? So it's really emphasizing he's going the wrong place. Now, how many of you, hopefully you know a little bit of U.S. geography. If it'd be like I'd be right here, and God says, hey, you right there, you need to go to New York City and you need to preach the gospel. And instead of you going to New York City, that's on the eastern side, you go to L.A. Is that the same direction or opposite direction? Opposite direction. And that's what Jonah's doing. He's supposed to go to Nineveh, Iraq, Iran, probably somewhere around there. He goes to Tarshish. That's like Spain. Exact opposite direction of where God's, telling him to go. But the principle is this. When he goes down, there's a boat that's going to lead him to somewhere else. Whenever you're interested in running away from God, the reality is there will be lots of boats that will take you lots of other places. In the wrong places. And people will have all sorts of opportunities to try and lead you astray. When God would tell you to go to Nineveh, there's a boat headed for Tarshish. There's probably lots of other boats. So if God's telling you, hey, I want you to live out the Christian life here in your high school, or I want you to live out the Christian life here in your middle school, there's going to be all sorts of other boats that we think, hey, my life's going to be better if I head on the boat of partying and I follow that lifestyle. Or if I'm so caught up in my academics that it's my number one pursuit. Or if I'm so caught up in my sport or my instrument or whatever it may be. You're trying to climb the popularity ladder, trying to date this person. There are all sorts of opportunities for us to be led astray. And so we have to recognize it, and we just have to remember that there's only one way, which is God's way. And so we want to make sure that we're always lining up in the Lord's principle. For every opportunity we have to obey God, there are lots of opportunities to disobey God as well. So it's so important for us to be following Jesus now while we're seeing these opportunities. So that's the first truth. We have opportunities to disobey God's word. Second truth is this: your disobedience will numb you from recognizing consequences of your decisions. Your disobedience is going to numb you. You know what numb means? Has anybody ever had like their arm turned numb? You know what it's like?
Every stupid migraine.
Oh yeah, see that's unfortunate, right? So what happens when you get numbed? You're not able to react, right? So like if your arm's numb and then all of a sudden your arm gets bit, you don't feel it because your arm's numb. This is what's happening to Jonah. He's so closed off from what God's plan is because of his sin. Verse 4. So we go to Tarshish, but the Lord threw a great wind onto the sea, and such a great storm arose on the sea that the ship threatened to break apart. The sailors were afraid, and each cried out to his God. They threw the ship's cargo into the sea to lighten the load. Meanwhile, Jonah had gone down to the lowest part of the vessel and had stretched out and fallen into a deep sleep. The captain approached him and said, "What are you doing, sound asleep? Get up, call to your God, and maybe this God will consider us, and we won't perish." So, massive storm, ship being torn apart. These guys think they're going to die. These are grown men, sailor, fishermen. Well, I don't know if they're fishermen, but they're sailors. They're men of the sea. They've seen hard stuff. And in this moment, they're calling out to their God because they think they're going to die. Some of you walk in here like you're all tough. You know who you are. Maybe some of you. You walk in like you're all tough. All of a sudden, you're in like a really scary situation, and then you're like calling out like to your mom or whatever it may be, or to your grandma or to your sister or someone to help you. If you come to D now, maybe one of you will get so scared that you'll do that. I don't know. Maybe not. But that's the picture. These people who you wouldn't really think would get scared are getting really scared because this is such a big and bad storm. So they're afraid for their life. And meanwhile, where's Jonah? Where was Jonah at? Asleep. In the ship. Isn't that interesting? Well, you say, well, doesn't that sound familiar? Do you remember someone else in the Bible who was in the middle of a storm and was fast asleep? Yeah. Jesus. Do you remember that story? So Jesus, why could Jesus be fast asleep in the ship, in the boat during the storm? Because he's the Lord over it, isn't he? He's the one that all he has to do is say, "Peace, be still," and all of a sudden, storm's gone. Does Jonah have that power? No. So Jesus could sleep because he had peace, but Jonah is sleeping, and it's showing us just how unaware of all this it is. The storm, do you think it's a coincidence or purposeful? Purposeful, because who sent it? God sent it. The Lord sent this storm to him. So God has put this storm in there to get Jonah to wake up. It's a warning sign. Hey, Jonah, you need to be going to Tarshish. You're going in the wrong direction. He's sending the storm to try to get him back on track, but Jonah's missing the message. He's fast asleep in the ship while everyone else is there. It's interesting, too. If you look, another theme you see is Jonah going down. It says there in verse 3, he went down to Joppa, to Tarshish, paid a fare, went down into it. And then in verse 5, he went down to the lowest part of the vessel. So he's going down, down, down. It's a picture that Jonah's running from God. It's a reality of a relationship issue. That Jonah, he's not only just physically not going where the Lord wants him to, but physically, he's going farther and farther away from God. He's going down, down, down. And that's what's happening. And he's missing the warning signs that God has for him. And it's incredible, the people who are the ones who catch it. Who are the ones who are afraid by the storm? Yeah, the crew. Now, are the crew nice Jewish Hebrew boys? Or are they pagans? We can say pagans, so that means that they don't worship the one true God. They're the ones who are seeing the sign. They notice, wow, this doesn't seem right. This sounds kind of crazy. And look at what the captain says. It's really amazing what he says. Does someone want to read it? Someone have it, verse 6. They want to read it out. What does the captain say? What are you doing, sound asleep? Get up, and what's his next words?
Call on your God. Right.
Call on your God. Pray. Isn't that interesting? So he doesn't even believe in this God that Jonah's believing in, this God who came and spoke to Jonah. But he's saying, dude, you got to wake up. You got to figure out what's going on here. You need to call on your God. Isn't that interesting? The God who Jonah's running from. And Jonah should be the one in this moment, you would think. He's the prophet. He's the one who's supposed to preach God's word to the people who don't know him. But his sin has so blinded him that he's unaware of the warning signs and he can't speak the truth. It's a beautiful irony that these people who don't know Jesus, they're actually telling him, hey, you need to get right with God. You need to call upon him. Maybe that's how we're going to be saved. And that's what's going to happen. Some storms are a result of our actions. We see that. There are some times in life where if we make a bad decision, storms will come. If you cheat on a test, you get caught. You fail the test. You get in trouble. You get grounded. And like all this stuff happens and you're missing out on all this fun stuff, then you're thinking, oh, why did all this bad stuff happen to me? And you're just like, you're like trying to play the victim, like, oh, I can't believe I'm missing out on this and this and this and this and this. Well, the reality is it's a consequence of your action. What would happen if you had a job? Any of you guys have a job? I don't know if any of you guys do. Any of you guys have a job? Okay, Emma does. Hey, some of our adults have it. Employment is a good thing. Employment's a great thing. What would happen if you don't show up to your job? And you call off from your job. And when you're at your job, you're on TikTok and Snapchat and all those kinds of things. What do you think's going to happen? You're going to get fired. And what happens when you get fired? You don't get any more money. And then all of a sudden you have no money. You can't do all the things that you want to. And you're just struggling, right? And then you're thinking, why in the world am I in this storm? Why am I at this? Look, it's not that just something popped up randomly. It's actually a consequence of your action. This storm for Jonah, consequence of his actions. He shouldn't have been there. I think if he's on a ship for Tarshish, probably not a storm. Now look, not every storm in life is a result of consequences. There are just sometimes hard things in life just happen. That's just the reality of it. But there are some times in life where we kind of make messes and then we get to experience the consequences of those messes. So you see that Jonah, he's just so numb that a pagan sailor has to remind him, hey, you need to get up and call to God. And it's amazing too. He says that word get up. That's what God would tell him in verse 2. Let's keep on reading. We'll see this next truth. Your disobedience is known by God and will likely be found out by others. So sometimes we think we can sin, we can do all sorts of stuff in private, and we think we're good, we can cover it up. Jonah thought that too, and we'll see what happens. Verse 7. Come on, the sailors said to one another, let's cast lots. Then we'll know who is to blame for the trouble we're in. So they cast lots, and the lots singled out Jonah. Then they said to him, tell us who is to blame for this trouble we're in. What is the business? What's your business? Where are you from? What's your country? What people are you from? And he answered them, I'm a Hebrew. I worship the Lord, the God of heavens, who made the sea and the dry land. Then the men were seized by a great fear and said to him, what is this that you have done? The men knew he was fleeing from the Lord's presence because he had told them. So they cast lots. For you guys in our high school guys class, you'll know whenever it's time to pray, there's always that awkward time when no one wants to pray. A lot of times what happens when when it's time to pray. You want to say it? We roll the dice. John brings in a pair of dice. And more often than not, what happens when you roll the dice? The person who rolled the dice is the one who it lands on. So he's the one who gets to pray. It's kind of funny. That's what casting lots is, basically. It's like kind of rolling a dice. So again, what's going on at the moment? Is this like card night out on the ship or not? No, it's like, hey, it's in a huge storm, we're about to die. Hey, let's go play lots. Let's go get some dice. Let's figure out whose problem this is. So it's kind of funny. Jonah, they're again showing that they're not really interested, or they're just really desperate that they would go to this length. They're rolling the dice. Of course, the dice lands on Jonah, God who's in control over the sea. He also is in control of the dice. Ask Jonah, hey, what do you think you're up to? Jonah has to tell him, hey, look, I'm all this. And Jonah's response, again, it just shows how out of touch he is. He's like, I'm a Hebrew. I'm the one who worships the true God. Now, if Jonah was one who was worshiping the true God, he would be on a ship headed for what city? Nineveh. But what city is he headed to? Tarshish. And so there's this disconnect between what Jonah is saying and what he's doing. Do you see that? So Jonah's saying like, hey, I worship this God. He made the sea. He made all this kind of stuff. But yet he's disobeying him. So he claims this label, but then he doesn't follow through. How easy is it for us? A lot of times it's easy to claim the label, I'm a Christian, I'm a believer, I'm a Baptist. But then you look at their life and you don't see it match up. That's what sin can do to us. It can blind us. It can say, we can think we're one way, but in reality our actions show something really different. And that's what happens. Jonah, he was trying to run from God, like Adam and Eve tried to hide from him as well. But it just doesn't work. God already knew what Jonah was up to. God knew where he was supposed to go. But then it also goes to the next part where Jonah thought he could just go on this boat, no questions asked. He could get to Tarshish, he'd be on his merry way. But God worked out a way for everyone else to find out. So much for us, we spend a lot of time trying to hide our sin from God, even though God already knows, which is kind of silly. But then we can also try to hide our sin from others, where we don't want other people to find out what's really going on, what you're really doing with those friends, what kind of words you're really using, what kind of things you're really looking at and scrolling out. But I really do think this is true. Your disobedience will likely be found out by others. Jonah didn't think that he could do it. He thought he could cover it all up. But there are a lot of times in life where he'll get found out. And so our goal is not just to try to bury it away. We don't want to bury away disobedience. No, we have to, in humility, come to the Lord and say, hey, God, I'm messing up with this. And maybe go to someone else. And so that way you can actually work together. We can be so afraid of the thought of, what if my parents found out that I was doing this? Or what if my brother told on me? Or whatever. And we can be so afraid of that. But then we don't put enough effort into actually trying to get out of it. And so Jonah tells them the truth. Hey, I'm on the run from God. They know this isn't good. And the world, see, the story keeps going. And then, next point, you deserve death because of your disobedience. But our gracious God saves sinners. So we're going to see here, Jonah says, they ask him, okay, what are we going to have to do? Read with me verse 11, we'll read to the end. So they said to him, what should we do to you so that the sea will calm down and calm down for us? For the sea was getting worse and worse. And he answered them, pick me up, throw me into the sea so that it will be calmed down, so that it will calm down for you. For I know that I am to blame for this great storm that is against you. Nevertheless, the men rowed hard to get back to dry land, but they couldn't because the sea was raging against them more and more. So they called out to the Lord, please, Lord, don't let us perish because of this man's life. And don't charge us with innocent blood, for you, Lord, have done just as you pleased. Then they picked up Jonah and threw him into the sea, and the sea stopped its raging. The men were seized by a great fear of the Lord. They offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows. And the Lord appointed a great fish to swallow Jonah. And Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. So they asked Jonah, hey, how can we make this right? Jonah says, throw me in the sea, kill me. And this isn't like one of those like diving board kind of like splash, like, woo, you did a cannonball, Jonah. Swim back up. It's like, no, we're throwing you out and this is burial at sea. They're going to have to kill him. Now, if you're in the middle of a storm, you have to kind of think about this to really appreciate the response. If you're in the middle of the storm, think about this. You're on a boat. There's like 6 of you. One of them has a problem with God. One of them's running from God. They say, hey, I'm running from God. This is the whole reason why the sea's all messed up. And if you throw me out of the boat, then everything's going to be okay. And you're actually, you know that you're going to live. Now, whenever he says that, do you think you're likely to throw him out of the boat or likely to keep him in? What would he do? How many of you would be like, hey, okay, I'll grab your left foot? How many of you are like ready to throw him in? Anybody? Hey, we can be honest, that's okay. Hey, this guy's going to get you killed because he's got a problem with God. And now there's this big storm going to kill all of us. He says, hey, it's my fault. I'd be like, okay, I'll grab your left foot, you grab his right foot, and we're going to throw you out, right? But these guys, they didn't have that reaction, which is cool, again, because are these people who know God? Yes or no? No, they're not. But they still have this humility and this grace about them. So they say, you know what? We're not going to try that. We're going to still try and fight through it. They worked really, really hard to get to sea, or to get to the dry land. Verse 13, they couldn't. The sea was getting back at them. And it's just cool that they didn't take Jonah's advice immediately, like, probably we would. But it's descriptive of a bigger truth that we can't get out of some of these issues on our own. I don't know if these were the best sailors in the world. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't. But I do know, no matter what, they weren't getting out of that storm unless God wanted them to. And so their own effort, no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't do it. And likewise, our own effort, if we're trying to make it where I can get saved, I can be right with God through what I do, it's not going to work. Because we just don't have the strength. They didn't have that. They realized they can't get it out. They have to decide Jonah out. They ask God, hey, could you not punish us for taking his life? And again, it's just cool. They're calling out to God. When they throw him out, they make a sacrifice. They're fearing God, which is amazing because Jonah was a guy who was called by God to go and preach to people who didn't know God so that they could be saved. And in Jonah's disobedience to do that, God actually probably saved these guys. That by throwing them out, they got to see that this God's real. And they really believed, and they called out to him. Jonah's thrown out into the sea. He's going to be dead. He's going to be floating at the bottom of the ocean pretty soon. And he got what he deserved. Because our disobedience earns us the penalty of death. The Bible says, look, when we've done wrong, that means that we really messed up. And a good God who's against all forms of evil and all forms of bad, he can't let that kind of stuff go unpunished. So Jonah, he's thrown out because of his own actions. It's a good thing that, that he was thrown out. There are real consequences to us. For him, there's real consequences for us when we look at our lives. There are real consequences to our sin. It always ends in death. It doesn't end in life. But God, in his grace, provides a way of salvation. That even though Jonah was on the run from God, he didn't please God. He didn't tell these guys about the gospel. He wasn't going where he was supposed to. Down, 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 missing the warning signs. Yet God, in his grace, was giving him something he didn't deserve. And it was a fish. How many of you would say, how many of you thought whale, like first? Anybody think whale? That's okay. You see whale a lot. What does it look like in the pictures? Whenever you see the pictures like on the wall in those or in children's church, what does it look like?
The books I had, it was a whale.
It was a whale? What did it look like? Do you guys ever see the pictures where he's in the whale? What does it look like when he's in the whale? Anybody seen those before? You know what I'm talking about? What was that? It looks like a Pinocchio scene almost. Kind of like he's in the middle. Like, I always feel like he's got like a candle or something, and he's like, he's just hanging out. And you know how it's like, it's really big. It almost looks like Patrick's Rock. It's like that, but it's all hung. Do you guys know who Patrick's Rock is? Or Patrick's? Oh, thank goodness. Thank goodness. You guys know about SpongeBob. If not, that could have been rough. But anyways, like, you always think it's like this big cave, and there's like this nice little light, and Jonah, he's like, he's in normal clothes, and he just seems like he's having a good time. How many of you would actually enjoy being in a fish? Yeah, but not me either. So, it's preferable to being dead. Let's say that. I'd much rather be in the belly of a fish than being dead. Do you have something? Are you thinking?
Could he have eaten his way out?
Could he have eaten his way out? I don't know. This had to be a big fish. I don't think so.
Well, if he had a candle, yeah, he could have cooked you, right?
Yeah. Could he have eaten his... Well, here's the thing. He's in probably the digestive system, so there's like all sorts of slime and acids and all sorts of like gross kind of stuff. You think about that, all that the fish eats is probably like landing on his head. So he's probably like all like scrunched up, it's slimy, it's warm, but not like a warm, like a cozy warm, but like a kind of warm. There's all sorts of fish stuff on it. How many of you like the smell of fish? Like whenever you go and you collect a bunch of fish, when you've been fishing, you got like 12 in a bucket, and then you open that bucket later, it's like, ooh, that's a strong smell. Think of that times like 100. That's probably what it smells like, It's rough, but God provided a way of salvation for Jonah in his grace. Did Jonah deserve to be in a fish?
Yes.
Well, he probably deserved to be at the bottom of the ocean dead, right? So, the fish is a pretty good alternative. If you're asking, alive in a fish or dead in the ocean, I'm probably picking alive in the fish. But alive in the fish isn't going to be too fun, right? So he's in this place that's not too fun because God in his grace, he shows his love to us. Even when Jonah was running away from God, God still pursued him. God was still following him. And it wasn't a coincidence, again, that the fish came. It was, again, a result of what God did. Verse 17, the Lord appointed the fish. Jonah's story points us forward to Jesus. So Jonah is what we would call, he's like someone who foreshadows. He hints at what is going to come. That Jonah, he would be thrown into the sea, giving his life so that the fishermen, the sailors could be saved. Jesus, he was thrown onto a cross. And when Jesus was thrown onto a cross, by that sacrifice he made, others were saved as well. Jonah entered the fish. Jesus entered the grave. On the third day, God opened the mouth of that fish to spit him out on dry land. On the third day, God rolled away the stones that the stone of the tombs so that Jesus could walk out triumphantly. What Jonah's picture in his life presents a way in which Jesus fulfilled it to an even greater and a more beautiful way. Now, Jonah's not Jesus, because there's a big difference. Jonah was thrown into the sea because he sinned, because he deserved it. But Jesus was thrown into the sea of God's anger and God's fury and God's wrath against sin when he was sinless. That he would take the penalty that me and you both we should have died. That we should have been thrown out. We should have had that same experience. Yet Jesus plunged himself in there in obedience to God so that we could have new life. The stormy seas have been calmed for all those who are in Jesus. By his death, by his resurrection, God is saying, he's done it. He's taken the penalty. My wrath is satisfied. And all those who believe in him and follow him can have eternal life. That we can know Jesus when we follow him. So we have to be in Jesus. Knowing that Jesus, he's the only way that we can be saved. That he's already tasted death for us. And in him we can have real life. So if you're a Christian, we never want to get mistaken. To think that we're worthy of it. Or that we've done something to make us good. That we're saved because we're smarter than someone else. Or better than someone else. Or that we're in any way superior. No. We're saved because of what Jesus has done for us. And even though we're like Jonah and we're disobedient, and we would run from God, God would still love us so much that he would follow us and he would sacrifice in a tremendous, tremendous way. Let's not disobey God. Let's stop running from and run to the mission that God has for us. Let's pray. God, we do thank you for the life of Jonah and how he points forward to the even greater truth of what Jesus has done for us, that no longer do we have to all be plunged into the sea of the punishment that all of us deserve, that no longer would all of us have to taste death, but by Jesus' sacrifice for us, that we could know life. God, we recognize that's only because of you, because your grace is greater than what anything we could do. And we're thankful for that. We're thankful that you're a God who loves us, even those who don't deserve it. That's your name I pray. Amen.